So, do I think Bitcoin is lost? Yes, I do, unfortunately. And I have this funny sneaking suspicion that Satoshi has a sting in the tail for us all as we get closer to mining the last blocks. Also, economically, of course, with the halving, the economic factors become less and less attractive. And if you think about the distribution model and you work back the amount of Bitcoins that are actually in the open market, I think there's about 4.5 million stranded. There's so many different wallets that they've lost access, and the bulk of the remaining Bitcoin that's in the market is in the hands of very few people. So that in itself is centralized. Miners are centralized, and if you think about what it was meant to stand for, unfortunately, I think it's been lost. But wouldn't it be funny, of course, if the sting in the tail is that all Bitcoin accounts go to zero? We don't know what's in the coding ultimately.
So, Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to another episode of Tekka Talks Season 2. Today we have with us a very special guest, Nick Ayton. Am I saying your name right? Is it
Yes,
pronounced
you are. Yes,
Ayton?
Ayton, yes. Old Scottish name.
Excellent. So, Nick Ayton. Nick is a global speaker, summit chair, family office advisor, futurist, filmmaker, and creative technologist. With extensive experience in technology and finance, Nick is deeply passionate about exploring the intersection of innovation and social impact. He is the managing partner at Solarix Ventures. He works with founders and families to navigate the implications of technology on their global holdings and businesses. With a keen interest in blockchain and emerging technologies, Nick brings a wealth of expertise to the discussion on financial inclusion and access to banking services. So that, Nick, was the official biography. And I've been stalking your LinkedIn a little bit, so I know that does no justice at all. And you have so much experience in so many different fields. So I want you to please tell us about yourself, the unofficial story, and start from the beginning.
Well, thank you very much. And it's good to be with you all. And I think starting at the beginning is I did my computer science in the 70s. And as a very interesting backdrop, that was the world of mainframes. And although the younger generation would deny it, the world is still run by mainframes. The most critical systems, banking, payments, healthcare, manufacturing is still run by mainframes. So that was my grounding. And then in the 80s, of course, it went crazy when the computing arrived on the desktop and personal computer revolution arrived. And I was at the beginning of that as a young entrepreneur founder, and went through that decade designing and starting lots of different new businesses with mixed outcomes. Let's put it that way. The fairly classical entrepreneurial journey, some good stuff and some bad stuff. And then in the sort of mid 80s, I designed an in-flight cabin management system for commercial airlines, which you now take for granted. So when you watch your movies and you find that your seat's broken and the lavatory's broken, whatever. I designed some of those systems in the early 80s, which was a lot of fun, and arguably I still didn't know what I was doing. And then in the 20s, I ended up running some very large, big IT services companies doing technology outsourcing, which is in a sense a form of M&A. So I worked for some of the big brands, Capgemini and Siemens and so on. And then sort of 2012 got into Bitcoin, which is interesting. I read the paper. I met some of the early founders, mainly the Ethereum founders. Yeah, got into Bitcoin. 2012 got into Bitcoin, and then 2015, 2016 built one of the first regulated crypto exchanges. So I went through that crazy journey. In a sense, it was a lot of fun. And then later on that year, built a big fintech platform, which is used in the UK pension market, which is still quite a predominant sort of platform, if you like. And then essentially, yeah, I get invited to do a lot of public speaking, and then the family offices started approaching me saying, Nick, we want to invest in blockchain or quantum or AI. And invariably, what happens is that they try it, they lose their money, it doesn't work out, so they come to me, and I give them I give them a different opinion on the technology. Does it work? Because founders always talk a good game, don't they? And so I spend a lot of
They
time, and
have
we
to.
end up running some of the world's biggest family office events. And we have a big event 3-4 times a year in Abu Dhabi called the Abu Dhabi Family Office Summit. And I play with frontier and deep tech, so I'm quite lucky.
So this is a great way to start off. What got you into Bitcoin and that early on too?
We'll be right back after the
Believe
break.
that the financial system is broken and that our banks and insurance companies do not have our best interests at heart. We've built Techaton to help us get together as a community to save, earn, and access credit. Join us today and discover how you can grow your savings while helping others.
Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because back in the 2012, 2013, nobody really knew what it was. We, if you think about going back philosophically, okay, so I'm not a big fan of banking or central bank model, and I think that as a lot of centralized models, they discriminate against the people they're meant to help. And so, the libertarian in me comes out quite a lot here, and we'll talk about that. But if you've got a central authority deciding everything, how your money's treated, how it's behaved, can you have it, can you not have it, is this transaction valid, is this transaction not valid? By default, whether it's financial, whether it's healthcare, all of these systems discriminate in some way. And it's normally, isn't it, the people at the bottom of the food chain, the people less fortunate, the people that may not have the latest tech or the best opportunities, they are often the ones that carry the can for the rest of us. So Bitcoin, as defined by the original paper, which actually doesn't mention blockchain, was designed as a payment system for the people by the people. And it was designed as a system that just didn't discriminate. And well, it's been hijacked now, hasn't it? It's been hijacked by Wall Street. It's been hijacked by, the miners, and it's heavily manipulated. But its in original form, Bitcoin was genius because it enabled me to move money, and it's technically not peer to peer. It's peer to miner, miner to miner, miner to peer. But technically allowed people to send small micropayments and small amounts of money without having this centralized authority that made decisions and to do it cheaply. So it looked good back in those days, but as a layer one technology, it's there, but it hasn't really matured as I'd hoped. But it proved it could be done. Double spend and all of that. It's it needs it, and I would argue that the world needs it even more than ever.
That's fantastic. So you obviously came into Bitcoin because you believed in what it stood for, which is decentralization, which is the ability to democratize, money essentially. And you mentioned that it's now heavily manipulated. It had, there's just these whales and these institutions who are coming in and trying to take over. Now, do you think that is going to be the fate of Bitcoin, where it's going to lose that element of that initial reason why it existed? Do you think that can happen? And do you think it's still something that we should continue to sort of put our faith in, or has the world moved on, or do we need to build an alternative?
Oh, there's a lot in that question, so let me unpack that a little bit. So, do I think Bitcoin is lost? Yes, I do, unfortunately. And I have this funny sneaking suspicion that Satoshi has a sting in the tail for a stall as we get closer to mining the last blocks. Also, economically, of course, with the halving, the economic factors become less and less attractive. And if you think about the distribution model and you work back the amount of Bitcoins that are actually in the open market, I think there's about 4.5 million stranded. There's so many different wallets that they've lost access, and the bulk of the remaining Bitcoin that's in the market is in the hands of very few people. So that in itself is centralized. Miners are centralized, and if you think about what it was meant to stand for, unfortunately, I think it's been lost. But wouldn't it be funny, of course, if the sting in the tail is that all Bitcoin accounts go to zero? We don't know what's in the coding ultimately. Um, who is Satoshi? Well, the courts ruled that it's not Craig Wright, but my belief is it's not one person. It's always been several people, and I think the great thing about Bitcoin is it proved the potential that a decentralized way of doing things can work. And Bitcoin is really good. I mean, it's never been hacked as other chains have, networks have. It works. It is slow, but obviously the compromise is always you sacrifice performance when you have a decentralized environment because you have to defend a larger attack surface. So performance has never been its sales pitch. Really, it's really been the democratization of being able to send you some bitcoins. And this is Cherie, this is how it works, right? So if I've got 10 Bitcoin, okay, and I owe you 5, right? I send my 10 to the network. The network then sends me 5 back and sends 5 on to you. And that's the genius, because then you have back to Genesis, you know every transaction and you can track and trace every Bitcoin. And you know its history. And, arguably, we'll probably talk about central bank digital currencies. That's why governments like the central bank digital currency. It's the track and traceability. But of course, they want to take it one step further, which is more of authoritarian command and control.
Something you said really concerns me, and that's primarily you said we don't know what's in the code, and could it be that right at the end, once the last Bitcoin is mined, everything goes to zero? Now, how is it that we don't know what's in the code? Isn't that the point? Wasn't that the promise that we are actually able to see everything in the code?
Well, yes and no. Okay, so Bitcoin big B, Bitcoin small b. One is a smart contract, one is a network. So the problem you have is if you look at what smart contracts is an unfortunate terminology. Of course, Nick Szabo is probably kicking himself, but the point is that they're not neither smart nor contracts. They are little bits of code or calculation waiting for an input, and they sit at an address somewhere on a chain of blocks somewhere. So you have an address. It's sitting there waiting for an instruction. Let's see if the last instruction says I'm mining the last block. The instruction goes to that, and then all of a sudden it sort of switches everything off. So we can't actually see what every block and every smart contract contains. By nature, it's pseudonymous, it's secure, it's immutable, can't be changed. But we also can't see what's at every address. And I'm just speculating. Wouldn't it be funny if maybe Satoshi knew that
No, it wouldn't.
Maybe it would be hijacked by Wall Street, and maybe he's going to turn it all off.
Wow, that's profound.
Thank you. It would be interesting to know where you coming up with this, advice or solution, because it's very interesting. Because most of the Bitcoiners, I mean, the people who are part of the network are very how would say fanatic, into the preservation of the code itself, and how they don't even want to improve it. They want to keep it that way, and that's why there's a lot of difficulties to actually build on top of Bitcoin, because they want to keep it that way, and that's what the majorities of participants in the network are keeping it that way. I was in Denver and they had this Bitcoin event where they had a lot of people going there, and they were still very difficult to crack in, adopting the Bitcoin to be more flexible to code on the layer 2 and so on and so forth. Anyway, but it would be interesting to look at your assumption. What I'm interested to know is we have everything on chain, so we know that there's not a majority owner of Bitcoin because it's open to everyone. As you mentioned, Satoshi is many of those people. Then they have a majority holding on the Bitcoin itself if you add up many of the wealth. The whole point of Bitcoin is really to have not a single ownership, and everybody owns a bit of it all over the world and have some wealth. What would be the interest? My question is, what would be the interest of them, first of all, shutting it down and losing the appeal that Bitcoin has been created as an asset class that is an alternative to the financial economic system and digital gold, like they call it?
Well, again, there's quite a bit in there. So it's for me, it's not an asset class, right? It's backed by mathematics and energy, so you can argue it as an asset class because mining Bitcoin is expensive and difficult, and you're right. There's the core Bitcoin community that are very protective, and that's why when Roger set up Bitcoin Cash and various other people have forked the original code, there was a lot of people have problems with it. But let's be very clear here. Bitcoin is a very, very simple technology, and the fact that Bitcoin has increased in value is it's a little bit worrying in a sense, because who's actually controlling the mining? What is the supply? I mean, used to know some of the biggest Bitcoin miners, and they could actually put Bitcoin into the market and they could move its price quite significantly. And as the market cap increases, of course, that becomes harder to shift the market. But it's still possible to shift the market a few points. But I think it's the investment banking, the bankers, the traditional bankers that have hijacked the system here. If you think about what we were trying to do in the early days, I remember back in 2016, I tried to buy a bit license, and there was only 3 in New York, and it's Nick Spanos, in fact, one of the guys that set up one of the original Bitcoin sort of exchanges. He's got one. I think Gemini's got another one. I don't know who the third one is. But then if you think back to, the early days in 2016, 2017, there was no infrastructure to support Bitcoin or blockchain or doing any of this. Signature Bank, Silvergate Bank were in their infancy. You couldn't get banking. And if you think about what's happening now with the CFTC and the SEC, what have they done? They've attacked the crypto infrastructure, because if you think about it, if I'm a regulator, and I've spoken to loads of regulators, and arguably I'm probably on the naughty list of the regulators somewhere. As somebody said to me, 80% of new, Wall Street traders are on the naughty list at some point. But if you're a regulator, what are you going to do, right? You've got this new thing, Bitcoin comes along. It's complicated. They're not technologists, these regulators. So they're immediately going to feel threatened. And the second thing they're going to try and do is, rather than create new regulation, which is complex, they're going to try and get Bitcoin and crypto and the whole blockchain world to fit into existing regulation. Okay, so you had the Howey test and all of this nonsense, where they're trying to say, is a token, is it asset bearing? Does it have value? Is it utility? Does it behave as a voucher? All of this debate came into a big argument. But ultimately, in some respects, that the regulators are doing us a big favor, because the SEC and the CFTC are pushing the market towards Asia. They're pushing it east, where if you look at what's going on in the UAE right now, very progressive regulation. And actually, there is substantial capital that's sitting behind the regeneration of I think, of the crypto story. It's happening in Saudi, it's happening in the UAE, and then we have, of course, the BRICS conversation, which is we're moving back to, which I think is a good thing, which is where money at its core has some intrinsic value, where I think the West is losing the battle here. And if you look at every sort of reserve currency, I mean, there's been 300 reserve currencies, hasn't there, in goodness knows how many hundreds of years, millennia, but they all fail. And very few of them last more than 100 years. It's because the governments and the people who control money supply, they don't have the fiscal restraint, and let's say they don't have the they get greedy, right? And the printing presses keep going, and and we're now waiting for the US dollar collapse, of course, which is inevitable. And sooner we move away from a US dollar economy, in my view, is a good thing. And this is why the BRICS idea and the BRICS concept, having it gold backed and other precious metal backed, I think brings it back where currency suddenly becomes more trusted. Now, it doesn't mean to say that the people at the bottom of the food chain, as we said earlier, are going to benefit from that. They should do. But I think at least it gives us a great deal more confidence and faith in a monetary system and something behind it. Whereas, all that the dollar has, sterling, euro, is an IOU from a government that's got no money. And that's worrying.
Absolutely. I'm going to bring this conversation back full circle, but I did want to point out something. And I think that money is not the point. And the reason why we're in the situation we are in today with Bitcoin and with the fiat world in general is that people are concerned with getting and accumulating money, as in cash or, numbers, digits in a wallet, so on and so forth. Whereas money was always meant to be a medium of exchange. So the whole idea is you're supposed to accumulate goods or services or something that you can benefit from, something productive, and not the actual money itself. But today with Bitcoin, it's all about accumulating the Bitcoin as though the Bitcoin can do something for you. You can eat the Bitcoin or something like that. But I think this is where we've gone off the rails with Bitcoin, which then makes me think, let's take a step back and let's look at the financial system and the banking system and what is wrong today that has caused the need for a new alternative form of money, medium of exchange. So from your point of view, we still have a very high unbanked population in the world, right? We still have countries where, in Africa, for example, where their money is actually printed in a different country and they can use their money nowhere except by first converting it. We still have these situations all over the place. What is going on? Why? How did, despite having so many years of development, so much wealth, so much technology, how are we still not able to simply bank the unbanked?
Okay. Now, do you want me to answer how I really feel about this?
Of course.
We'll be right back after the break.
Introducing TechAssure, the life insurance fund that is owned by the very people it insures. You share in the profits from insurance operations and take care of your family even after you're gone. Of course.
Right. Okay. So let's roll back. So you're absolutely right. It's not really about money. Okay. It's about people to, if the heartbeat of this, every person born on this planet has the right to own their sovereignty, to own their ideas, to own their value, to own their information. Okay. But unfortunately, that doesn't work that way, isn't it? Because the centralized systems around the world use money as a means to control and manipulate people. They do it in healthcare, they're doing it in food, they're doing it in energy. Okay, and these are core systems. And if you think about, so I live in the UK, right? So we've got a very old monarch system of government and monarchy. My family date back to the 12th century, and they're Scottish. The head of our family tree was killed by Richard I in the Border Wars. So when you roll back through history and you think about how land and the distribution of wealth and power and control was maintained over hundreds of years, and I've got a family just down the road that lived in the same estate for 700 years. So how is that possible? And it's possible because of power and control. You have different functions, don't you, that keep the people in their place. And it could be money, could be health, could be religion, could be food supply or access to food, access to water. And that's the problem, is the reason we don't have free and equal distribution of resources and the reason society is not fair is because you have people at the top of the food chain controlling things. Okay. And that's why Bitcoin was so important, to prove that in a decentralized, democratic way that everyone could participate. Okay, you needed access to Wi-Fi, you needed access to a smartphone, but technically, it's why M-Pesa does so well in Kenya and parts of Africa. is because it doesn't discriminate, and people can earn and collect small stores of value, but use it to buy food and to buy rice, to buy meat, to barter and exchange value. So you're absolutely right. Bitcoin was a fantastic demonstration that it could be done. But then again, you look at the rest of the world, what's going on. Do the people that have that power and control through a centralized authority, do they want it? And they've never wanted it. It's a threat. So, you've got these different moving forces. And, yes, there are unbanked and there are people. So there's a storm coming, right? So there's a number of these new sort of, let's say, crypto banking institutions backed by old money. And if you think about what people like Musk are doing, he has his fans and he has his detractors, yeah. But if you look at something like Starlink, okay, so telcos, Wi-Fi are licensed and regulated organizations, government controlled. 80% of the 80,000 boundary routers that run the internet is controlled by the big telcos and under government license. The internet has no protection doesn't protect your value, doesn't protect your information, doesn't protect anything. Okay, it's a mesh network designed by Dr. Donald Davis in 1956 as a packet switch network. Okay, but the fact that 80% of the devices that run the network are from US manufacturers, there's the answer, right? The means of control. Now, what Starlink brings to the table, and what Twitter has done or X has done in terms of trying to liberate freedom of speech, because it's all been locked down at the moment, is very interesting, because Starlink has the propensity to actually allow anybody on the planet to have access to telecoms, to communication, as almost like as a birthright. And I think some of the things he's been talking about is to not put a financial limiter on that so everyone can join. Now, the next question, of course, Shireen, is that, if you look at the current products and services that are available to people, they're actually not fit for purpose. Banks and insurance companies and wealth management companies, they design products for people who have a big fat salary check at the end of the month that they can use to sell them product. But there are no products for people at the bottom of the food chain. And arguably, there's no products for Gen Z. I've got, my children are 26 to 38, right? So they're good representatives of millennials and Gen Zs. But why is this new generation of Gen Z and millennials, why are they not engaging in these financial systems? Because the products are not fit for purpose. So we have the unbanked at the bottom. Okay, and there is the reason they're unbanked is two things. First, access to infrastructure, and the second thing is product. At a very basic level, what is the product they want? They want to be able to trade their personal value, protect their sovereignty, and be able to exchange goods within a village, within a city, within a local community, within a group. And we know humans identify as groups, but they want to be able to trade their value locally, and they want to be able to do it freely with the full knowledge and protection that what they create and what they exchange is theirs, and it's not going to be hijacked, or a central authority is not going to get in the way and charge them for the benefit, or even steal it or borrow it or copy it. So I think, I'm a little bit off piste, but I've got my new TV miniseries is going to pre-production. And it's essentially about humanity, or man against artificial intelligence, the existential threat. And we can debate, what AI is, and I can show you some very, very scary AI. None of this generative AI stuff, which is not very intelligent, to be honest. But if you look at the political, geopolitical, and the structural things around humanity and civilization, it has to change, right? It has to change fundamentally. And we know that, right? We know it's unfair. We know the people that try or think or are running the world control all the resources. But there's this enormous groundswell coming where people are starting to wake up to the idea that things have to change. So the TV miniseries it's a drama, it's a tech thriller, but ultimately it plays out a lot of the social issues that we're facing today. Authoritarianism is a big one. How governments are using identity, AI, health, food, control of money supply as a means to control the masses. Now, you do need structures around the world. Yes, we know that. You do need, regulation. You do need police. People need to be safe. They need to know they trust the system. And in a sense, that's why I'm a big fan of the Middle East, right? Because it is run by families. It has a degree of benevolence, and they do look after people, make sure, and it's entirely safe. Which, as a Western person living in the UK, safe is a big factor for me, and it's a big factor for families. And I would argue it's probably not entirely fair, right? But it's better than what you have in other places. So for humanity to move to a Type 2 civilization, forget off-world and Mars and all of that, but even at a basic level, our political systems are also broken as well, aren't they? Two-party systems. The West moan that you've got the threat of communism in China. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced of the communist threat. I think it's a convenient argument. But if you look at the two-party systems in the UK and in America in particular, they don't represent the population anymore. Republicans and Democrats are probably 25, 26% of the vote. You've got 48% of people that don't relate to any party. And that is sweeping across Europe. That is sweeping across the Western democracies. And arguably, they're not democracies anymore. Okay? They're leveraging and putting people on the back foot. And let's not talk about the pandemic. For me, the pandemic was a test to see how far they could push people. And I don't know what they've got coming next, but let's assume something is coming next. But it's another test. So I know we're getting a bit off piste here, but at the end of the day, having the people that are missing out, the unbanked, what's important for them, right? The things that we don't talk about is access to water. Water's going to, at some point, is going to be the most valuable commodity on the planet. And the Middle East and the Arab world, the GCC world, understand the value of water. Africa understands the value of water at a very basic human level. Is a human right? Is a human right access to, should it be access to water at a minimum, clean drinking water? Yeah, I would argue yes. Is it a right for everyone to have a means of, in a Web3 sense, controlling their identity, controlling their information, controlling the value they create, and being in charge of the things that they trade without being controlled or told by a third party? Yeah, I think it is. I think it is a human right to have that. So I think, we need to, what was there, 7.7 billion coming up for 8 billion people. We have big issues, don't we? Unbanked is one, but feeding that amount of people with the amount of land. We have lots of land, but unfortunately the earth is not in good quality, is it? The soil, because we haven't done a good job of managing that. There is stockpiles of energy, stockpiles of food, stockpiles of water, but it's unequal because it's used as a trade leverage between different trading blocks. Political systems are not really working for the people either. They do in certain countries. The great thing I love about, if you look about China, if you look about the Middle East, you look about some other countries, they have a 10 to 25 year plan. That's important. It's more important than ever. We have an aging population. We're running out of water. We're running out of food. We have some climate issues to challenges. We have international trade that needs a longer, bigger picture. But unfortunately, the Western world thinks in periods of 2 years, planning for the next election, and they always undo the good job that's been done before. What you're talking about, Shireen, is a interrelated structural issue, isn't it? Around many of the things that are interrelated. And can you do one without the other? You can do bits, but we need a bigger game here, I think.
To be extremely reductionist, because you just said a lot. I mean, there's a whole manifesto right there. But to be extremely reductionist, what I'm hearing from you is that the fundamental problem obviously is not simply access to money, banks, etc. As a matter of fact, we don't really care. The unbanked really don't care about being banked because the banks are not building products for them anyway. So
Exactly.
forget the banks. What the fundamental issue we're talking about is ownership, sovereignty, and sort of getting rid of centralized control.
Yes.
And so, what does that world look like to you? Because we are so used to having somebody in charge, right? And maybe having somebody in charge inevitably leads to centralized control and usually an abuse of power. So how does this world look like where we actually are able to have sovereignty, as in everybody has the right to have sovereignty and has the right to then also appoint people, as custodians if they want, but that fundamentally, if they wanted to get it back, they could. What does that world look like?
Well, let's just touch on Bitcoin, right? When it started, it was fully decentralized and democratic. So if you're doing a transaction, okay, and you broadcast it across all the nodes in the network, can't remember how many nodes there are, okay, then you're automatically getting a different concentration. It's not a fair network because you have this thing called network latency. So if you're doing a Bitcoin trade in Japan and the miner that's going to see it in America, he's not going to see it. There's milliseconds delay. So you get a distortion effect on what's going on in the network. Then you have the concentration of miners, of course, and certain mining pools. It's, the people with more money to put into energy into the big mining operations ultimately win. Now, proof of work as a consensus was, for me, I still think it's the outstanding, consensus algorithm out there. Whereas proof of stake is centralization and it is pure discrimination because you invest, you have to stake, and that whole thing of investment is a discriminatory effect, and it means that you can invest and you can afford to lose that capital, which means proof of stake, I think, is not good either. But it has happened to Bitcoin, unfortunately. It has been centralized in a sense because you've got mining pools, you've got miners, you've got nodes in the network that dominate over and above everybody else. Okay, so let's leave that there. But we know from a piece of technology, from a sort of libertarian point of view, we know we can create these more egalitarian systems, right? Now, if you look at sovereignty, okay, this is a really interesting area, right? Because we're all born equal. We're all born unique. And actually, one of the things that I play with a lot is quantum mechanics, metaphysics, and implicate order. Okay, and it all centers on vibrations and energy. And there's, so Cherie, what you have is you have 50 trillion cells in your body, and you vibrate, you resonate. The same as Mother Earth resonates. It's called the Schumann frequency. But every individual on the planet resonates. And in actual fact, your DNA, your helix, is actually a liquid crystal, and it resonates, it vibrates. So at a very fundamental human biological level, humans are very different. And we can measure human vibration. You can detect energy in the room from people, right? So as a living biological organism, we are completely unique. But then let's look at the biomarkers that the human body kicks off. And this all leads to self-sovereignty, of course. We've used fingerprints. Well, we now know that fingerprints aren't necessarily unique. Okay? We've looked at iris. Well, the iris is very complicated, yes, but the files are huge. We're now looking at voice. Voice patterns and voice is a very, very good indicator of who you are. And then you can even things like detect the levels of bacteria on skin with energy. So there's lots of different biomarkers now that can identify Nick is Nick, right? Now, let's look at the centralized systems, of course, right? So the whole concept of identity is they want us to prove who we are. And they know who we are because I've already filled in the form, okay? And my customer record or my data is on their centralized systems, and they use our data. They freely trade it and exchange it. They make money off the back of our data and for profit. So if I'm trying to pay a bill here in the UK, a utility bill for energy, Okay, they will continually ask me for lots of personal information. So we're now into the point of they are using identity and sovereignty as a means of enforcement to keeping me under control. Okay, so if I don't give them that data, I can't have the energy. But the point is how do we unlock all of this? Well, it's happening from a Web3 point of view. It's happening from a technology point of view, where we have this concept of least disclosure. So by different kind of transactional, what is the minimum set of information do we need to offer the other party to identify who we are? And is the onus on me to identify who I am, or is the onus on both parties to identify both parties who are going to enter into some kind of transaction? And that's where we need to get to. So the centralized command and control, where they control the data, they don't have permission, they lose our data, they get hacked. That's gone. That has to go. There's no way back, and it's clearly not working. But when we push information to the fringes, okay, about self-sovereign identity, who we really are, then we have to make it biomarker driven. Can't be passports, can't be driving licenses, it can't be passwords. It has to be biometrically driven to the individual, that it can't be faked. And the technology now exists to do that. And that argument is embedded in lots of different arguments, isn't it? But ultimately, we have the means to do it now, and we can't. It's interesting in the TV series, I've introduced a new political party, and the political party is based on a real movement which is concerned about the existential threat of AI, and it's basically geeks and academics all around the world, right? And the great thing about geeks and academics is they universally can agree, right? Because they love conspiracy, they love tech, they love the deeper stuff. They don't really like politics. So in terms of achieving consensus amongst a body of people that are aligned to a certain set of ideas and thinking is interesting, isn't it? To think about that. You take the political angle out of it, right? So this new political party is I've called it the last line of defense, because we know that governments are incapable of making the key decisions when it matters, because of the nature of politics. There's too much posturing, and there's winning and losing, and then there's doing what's good for them and not what's good for the population. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, isn't there? But imagine if you had a party that was aligned by different interests, making sure everyone's safe, making sure everyone has an opportunity, making sure everyone has water. So let's not think about a world order here, but ultimately, there has to be some consensus. So if you did a consensus to the world population, everybody, even down to the little guys, the old people, the young people, the worker bees, the whole thing, and you ask them their hierarchy of needs, okay, it would be pretty consistent geographically, I would argue. They all want the same things. They want to keep their families safe. They want to feed their families. They want to educate their families. They want to have opportunity. They want to have basic needs, basic infrastructure. Not hard, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's interesting that you're sharing this. I just wanted to point out that, most of the nations have been kind of ruled by the West, I would say, namely Europe. And we see even today that actually there's a failing way of, the double standard, I would say, policy on the European nations and the US in particular as well, show that there is a big disconnect between the southern nation, okay, and the nation, the Western economy. Is and I don't want to go into political details, just naming the Ukrainian war and the Gaza war, basically, or the Palestinian war. So this has really revealed the true face of what European, I would say, leadership is all about. And mainly is like still the neo-colonialism era hasn't vanished, has just revealed its true face, meaning they are still controlling and they still want to control, and they definitely have a different agenda that the world in general are still in shock to see that. And when we see atrocity happening even in today's world, there's very little of humanity left in terms of supporting what the evidence that are coming here in front of our eyes, unfortunately. But what is interesting is that the money, again, we go back to the money, is the driver to all this conflict and all these things that are happening. And the armament industry, the weapon industry, are doing very fine lately. Actually, they are making very well. And it seems that again, it's all about how much weapons you're going to sell, how much dollars you're going to print in order to buy those weapons, and so on and so forth. So I'm French myself originally, and I was surprised that the French government was the second manufacturer and suppliers of weapons in the world after the US. And of course, the rhetorics of we're going to go there, we're going to do that. No wonder they want to do that and go there. They need to continue to fuel the war mechanism because the industry and the economy is tied up to this war supply of weapons. So interestingly enough, we see in the nation of the South willingness and desire to live, as you mentioned, and to grow and to have a vision 20, vision 30, and so on and so forth. And it seems that the West are putting us back to the 100 Years War. Like when I look at the news, I'm like, are we back to the 90s, and they still want to fight those guys? They still want to kill people? That's all that matters. So when are you guys in the West going to wake up, get rid of those guys, maybe put the kings back? I mean, kingship is maybe the solution. I'm tired of those jokes coming every 4 months, 4 years, hijacking they actually, like one guy was saying, I was on Twitter or something like that. At least if we could have our politician, French, British, American, wear a suit, like those racing car suit guys with all the sponsorship on them, at least it would be like easier to identify to whom they really belong to and work to. I mean, it's time, to really
That's
wear
a nice
those suits,
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be at least easier to, we know. So, and that's what's happening. Very, very highly corrupted. And you really need the masses in Europe to wake up to these things, because cannot be fed on that every day. Now they want to send us to war against Russia. That's the last call on the President Macron. That's all he has to think about.
I know. It's worrying.
Come on.
It's worrying. So
Yeah.
So giving it back to the monarchs. So 1650. Okay, we're down at the Glorious Revolution, William of Orange, right? It was when the English monarchy diluted its power to create Parliament, and if that hadn't have happened, of course, then the Industrial Revolution never happened. So it's very interesting, and this is what didn't happen in Russia, of course, and ultimately the Russian royal families lost their lives. But I think you're right. I think it's a very important topic that you bring up, and there is if you think about the ultimate power, there's the biggest wealth transfer going on in the world right now, and it's from the baby boomers. I'm a baby boomer, right? So there's $84 trillion worth of family wealth transferring from the baby boomers to the Gen Xs. And these are the Gen Xs, and these people are probably in their 50s now. And some of that wealth is already going to the millennials, and they're in their 30s, and then some is going to the Gen Zs, okay? And it's an enormous shift in wealth. And what I've noticed with dealing with families, and it's a mixed bag, but we do a lot with families, certainly in the Middle East. And you know what about the Middle East is the families care. The big organizations, the big conglomerates, the private equity firms, the venture capital firms, the big banks, they don't care. It's all about shareholders. It's all about making a profit. right? But when you talk to the families, it's about succession, it's about longevity, it's about involving every member of the family. It's about, so we, at the Abu Dhabi Family Office Conference Summits, and credit goes to my youngest son, Obi. But what we've done is also created a platform for the next generation of families to talk, because it's important to see how they think. And they think different from the patriarchs and matriarchs who are baby boomers. And maybe their parents, are used to the Western model. They may hate it or embrace it, but a lot of them embrace it because they invest their money in fund managers and wealth managers and institutions, right? But this new generation don't think like that. They're looking to invest direct. They want to get involved in infrastructure, doing good, humanity, sustainability. They're into causes. And in some respect, a lot of the younger generation feel a little bit guilty and responsible for the enormous wealth that they sit on. Therefore, they really want to use that capital for doing good. And there's a lot of families. I mean, there's, 10,000 families around the world, about 1,500 new families in the last few years. And some of these families, especially the Middle East families, are conglomerates, don't forget. They're big employers. They've got their fingers into lots of different industries. And we talk with families in Saudi and Bahrain, and Oman and Qatar and UAE, all over. But we also talk to families in Hong Kong, in China. We talk to American families. We deal with a lot of big German families. Germany's a massive manufacturing base still, and they've got huge wealth, and families have enormous political power in the country as well. So what we're arguing here, in a sense, or what we're postulating, Morad, is what you've come up with, is yes, monarch, yes, but sometimes that's like historically. But I think the families have an enormous amount to offer in helping sort some of these problems out, because they're influential, they're powerful, they have capital, and they already are, in the Middle East in particular, they own infrastructure. You know how it works in the Middle East, right? So that the families sort of polarize into different areas where they've made their money, whether it's in logistics, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in oil services, whatever it is. And that means they have very specific interests in being able to do things and and that's why I love the Middle East so much.
Not to mention that leadership are very young. Mashallah, His Highness Prince Salman, for example, he's one of the youngest potential rulers in the world, and he's driving his economy in that fashion. Versus we now have two, I think, 19 years old guys running for office running for office in the US. So you have to choose between Trump or Biden. I think they're over 90. So it's interesting to see that the Western world have debating still who they have to put in place. I have respect to the oldest, trust me, but at the same time, I think it needs some kind of young generation to lead. Yeah,
I'm with you.
I'm with you. Very good discussion.
We can't have old men run the world, right? I mean, if I have this conversation with my wife all the time, right? Why don't we let women run the world? Okay, because they think differently. They put family first, okay, and they're not into getting the guns out. They're into having an argument or a conversation before they do anything.
I would agree. I would love to agree with you, but we didn't have a good example with Margaret Thatcher back then. So
well, for sure, but arguably she wasn't a woman, of course.
So let's see where this goes.
We're all about to get cancelled. Okay, so this has been a fascinating conversation. I think, again, to be reductionist, democracy is no good, monarchy no good. Let's bring it to the families. I think that idea has legs. Nick, I want to ask you about your TV miniseries. Now I'm fascinated. What is it called and where can people watch it? Question number one. And I would also like to give you sort of the final word. What is the main takeaway that we really that the audience should have from this discussion?
Well, the TV miniseries is entering pre-production, and interestingly, the finances behind it is a family office, which is interesting. And the TV series is aimed. I wrote 8 episodes, and I've written it as a wake-up call. Okay, so within the plot lines is man against artificial general intelligence, and that is an existential risk. Humanity needs to sort that one out. And it's like 1946 with Los Alamos, and you can't uninvent the nuclear bomb, right? With Oppenheimer, you can't. It's the same with AI. It's out there now, and I write various papers on this anyway. So, but the TV series looks at lots of different things. So it's looking at the social geopolitical challenges, what's going on. It looks at authoritarianism. It also looks at species and healthcare and DNA tampering. It also looks at the Gen Z and the Gen X's or the millennials sort of anxiety and social problems, the influence of social media on depression, suicides. So I've written it in a way because my children know me as crazy old dad, right, that does tech stuff. But they understand that a lot of what's going on is they're more aware than most, and that's probably because they listen to what I talk about. But there's an awful lot of people, a lot of young people that have got their heads in the sand, and they don't know they're being manipulated. They don't know what's coming, and they don't know they're being silenced. But they have uneasy feelings, and they're dealing and wrestling with all kinds of issues that we didn't have decades ago. The rise in mental health, the rise in suicides, the rise. My daughter is a dietitian. She works in the NHS frontline, so she's a gut specialist. We're having more people with more biological and healthcare conditions than ever before because our food production is broken and there's no education in food. So we're hitting all of those issues in the TV show. But at the end of the day, it's a suspense drama thriller, and I've written it to make you feel uncomfortable. We get the real issues on the table. And it's been a bit of a challenge finding a decent production house that's prepared to take it on. But it's meant as a piece of entertainment with a very, very strong series of social messages. So I'll park that one for the moment. But watch this space. I've written a graphic novel, which is a comic in old, and that will be out in June, which is the setup for the series. It's a prequel, and we're going to launch that at Comic-Con in June in America, and it's quite exciting. Lots of tech, and it's a bit of a ride. But hopefully, if the fans get behind it, then they'll be a little bit more aware of some of the things that's going on in the world. In terms of sort of where does that leave us all, and I think I don't believe in a dystopian future. I don't believe machines will hunt humanity. In a sense, I believe it will be far worse if we don't get AI under control. Okay, and I run various channels. So there's a paper I wrote about generative AI on my Medium channel, and the Chat GPT, the G, P, that's fine. It's the T, the transformer. That's the issue. That's the genie out of the box. That's the dangerous thing. And the new generation of AIs that do not use reference data. That's crazily scary. However, in the TV series, I also showcase lots of other alternative technologies. Free energy. We've had free energy systems for years, but the powers that be suppress them because it's not good for business. We've had cures for things for years. We understand, biologically how things work. We've had these cures for ages. And again, for one reason or another, they're suppressed. And you can argue that some of these big industrial systems want to keep us on the back foot, keep us ill, keep us, wanting. So let's not go there. But where does the future hold?
Yeah.
Well, imagine a world where you own your self-sovereign identity. Imagine a world where you own all of your data, all your information, and everything you create. What do we need to do for that to happen? It's very simple. You make the data itself intelligent. Okay? So we know whose data it is, where it came from, how old it is, who's viewing it, who's watching it, do you have permission? Because permission and access are two different things. Okay, you can have access to information that's not yours, but do you have permission? So if everyone can control their information, and we have this is what blockchain and decentralized systems can deliver at layer one. We can create a wraparound data where we know exactly where it is, who it belongs to, track and trace it in a positive sense. Not that the central bank digital currency is centrally controlled. No, it's that the individuals own their data. And if you've consumed my data and you don't have permission, or you've got access to one of my bits of content and you don't have permission, I can do various things. I can take action against it. I can send you an invoice. I can send you a legal letter, or I can turn it off and withdraw permission. So if we can get to that point, then the power shifts from the top of the pyramid to the bottom of the pyramid. And we have the technology capability to do that. So for me, as a last message, I think we can do it.
We are really deep into that, Sharon and I, with our decentralized insurance model and our saving and lending platform, which is totally DeFi, totally decentralized. Yeah. Nobody owns it. And you can, it's we true believer. Yeah, good point.
I think last word, I think it's we have lots of optimism, but we need to mobilize the people, and we need to wake the people up.
Absolutely. This has been a fascinating discussion. I have actually now a little bit pivoted my view. So it was always for me, okay, let's fix the financial layer, because that is where all the problems arise. But what you're suggesting is that it goes one layer below, which is, let's start with ownership of our data, our identity. And this is a very compelling argument. Thank you so much, Nick. If somebody wants to reach out to you, possibly to be a part of your TV show, where would they find you?
Well, I'm quite a big open networker, of course, so I'm on all the platforms. I'm a big LinkedIn user, so if you want to send me a message, you can. I've got a YouTube channel where I say some other things about capital raising, because founders need help and they just don't understand it. So I'm a big supporter of founders to get new ideas and technologies to
the name
market.
Of your channel?
It's Futurist in Shorts, because I normally wear shorts most of the time, because I don't like wearing suits. And it's Nick Ayton, YouTube. And I run lots of different channels where I put my views out. I've got a Medium channel, which I've written a paper actually about how Wall Street stole Bitcoin from the people. I think it's about 80,000-90,000 views and growing. So there's a few. Are they controversial? Maybe some people might think they are, but I think that for me, it's about getting the issue on the table. And I've always been somebody that has been unafraid to do that. So yeah, I'm out there. You can see lots of stuff I've done. And like everyone, I have my fans and I have my haters. So there you go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick, for your time today.
Nick, it was a pleasure, and thank you so much for your time.